Some things in life you just know. A bad storm coming. A horse that won't break. A woman with a secret. My name is Derek Evans and I've been sheriff of Jasper Creek for more than 30 years. This town raised me and I raised it right back. Folks here know me, respect me. When trouble comes, they look my way. But trouble doesn't always come wearing a mask and a gun. Sometimes it walks right through your front door, kicks off its heels and smiles like nothing's wrong. I was sitting at Dottie's diner nursing a black coffee when Red Daniels slid into the booth across from me. He always smelled like old leather and burnt coffee, his taxi hat pushed low over his forehead. "Evenin', Sheriff," he said, stretching like a man with too much time on his hands. "Got a fun one for ya. Want to hear who I dropped off at the Cedar Grove in last night?" I didn't look up from my cup. If I said no, would it make a difference? Red chuckled, running a hand through his scruffy beard. "Doubt it. You know me. Always got a story." He leaned in. "Couple of high rollers from Dallas. One of 'em, fancy-looking fella, ordered champagne at the front desk. Had a lady with him. Dark hair, sharp dresser. Real professional type. I stirred my coffee slow. That right?" Red watched me, eyes flickering with something I didn't like. "Pity, maybe. Ain't saying it means anything. Just figured you ought to know." I set the spoon down, glanced out the window. Jasper Creek was the kind of town where folks minded their business until they didn't. Red wasn't one to stir trouble for nothing. And something about the way he said professional type put a knot in my gut. I drained my coffee, tossed a few bills on the table, and stood. "Appreciate it, Red." "Anytime, Sheriff," he said, tipping his hat. The drive home was quiet. Margaret's car was already in the driveway, parked neat and straight like always. Lights on in the kitchen. I took my time going inside, boots heavy on the wooden steps. She was standing by the sink, pouring a glass of wine. Dark blue dress, hair pinned up like she'd just come from a meeting. She turned when she heard me, smiling, but there was something tight about it. "Hey, Derek," she said. "You're late." I set my hat on the rack, shrugged off my jacket. "Work's never done." She leaned against the counter, swirling her glass. "Tell me about it." I walked to the fridge, grabbed a beer. "Busy day?" She hesitated just a flicker, but I caught it. "Yeah. Meetings, calls. Same old grind." "Mm-hmm." I popped the cap off, took a slow sip. "Cedar Grove have good reception these days?" She stiffened just enough to tell me everything I needed to know. But she was quick. Took a sip of her wine, smiled like she didn't have a damn thing to hide. "Cedar Grove?" "Yeah." Red was talking about some fancy Dallas types staying out there. I met her eyes, held em. "Thought maybe you ran into em." She didn't blink. "Nope. I was in Austin all day. Conference ran long." I nodded. She was good. Too good. If I didn't know better, I'd have believed her. But I did know better. The phone on the counter buzzed. She glanced at it just for a second, then reached for it slow, turning it face down. "That was mistake number 2. Long day," she said, stretching. "I think I'll turn in early." I watched her go, her steps just a little too careful. I let her think she'd gotten away with it. For now. I let her walk away without a word, let her think she'd tucked that line neatly between us like a made bed. I wasn't the kind of man to stir up a fight without proof. Proof was everything. A man's gut could tell him plenty, but his gut wouldn't hold up in court. Or in divorce proceedings. The house was quiet after she went upstairs. I stood there a long while, finishing my beer, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the old wood under my boots. Outside, a coyote yipped somewhere past the tree line. I set my bottle in the sink, rinsed it out like it was any other night. No point in acting different. Margaret was careful. That much was clear. But she wasn't smarter than me. Next morning, I pulled up to the station at my usual time. The Jasper Creek Sheriff's Office was a small, brick building with a faded sign and a coffee pot that never quite got cleaned right. Jake Foster, my deputy, was already at his desk, going through last night's reports. He was a good kid, mid-30s, square-jawed, still had that shine in his eye like he wanted to change the world. He'd learn. "Mornin', Sheriff," he said, glancing up. "Coffee's fresh. Used the last of the good stuff, though." I grunted, poured a cup. "That just means tomorrow's gonna be hell." He chuckled, flipping through a report. "Oh, forgot to mention, saw Mrs. Evans yesterday at the gas station. She was on the phone, seemed. I dunno. Tense. Called somebody darlin'. Sounded like she was arguing." My hand still just a second on the coffee pot. I turned slow, took a sip. "That so?" Jake shrugged. "Could have been business. Just thought it was odd. She never really talks like that, does she?" "No, she didn't. At least not with me." I leaned against the counter, rolling that around in my head. Margaret was a controlled woman. She didn't make careless mistakes. But people slip when they get comfortable. They slip when they think they've won. I set my cup down, tapped my fingers against the rim. You ever hear of a man named Seth Harrison? Jake frowned, rifled through his mental files. Out of Dallas? Consultant. That's the one. He nodded, scratching his jaw. Yeah. Had a run-in with him a few years back when I was working the financial fraud case in Austin. Shady as hell, but smart enough to cover his tracks. Screws around a lot. Likes married women. I let that sit between us. Jake was sharp enough to connect the dots without me spelling it out. He exhaled slow, shaking his head. Damn, Sheriff. I picked up my coffee again, took another sip like we were just talking about the weather. That's what I thought. By noon, I had Tyler Delaney on the phone. I hadn't needed a private investigator in a while, but I kept a man's number when he was good at what he did. Derek, Tyler said, his voice gruff like he was chewing on a cigar. Didn't expect to hear from you. Need a favor, I said, leaning back in my chair. Discreet. Ain't my first rodeo. Who's the target? I gave him Seth's name. Margaret's travel schedule. Told him to get me anything useful, where they met, how often, how long this had been going on. I didn't need speculation. I needed facts. Tyler whistled low. Shit. Didn't think you were the type to get played, Derek. I felt my jaw tighten but didn't rise to the bait. I ain't. He let that hang a beat, then chuckled. Fair enough. Give me a few days. I hung up and sat there, tapping my fingers against the desk. Out the window, Jasper Creek moved like it always did, slow, steady, predictable. A couple of ranchers fueling up at the gas station. A kid pedaling too fast down Main Street. The Peterson boy, Tommy, was crouched behind the hardware store, peering around the corner like he was casing a joint. I pushed away from my desk and stepped outside. Tommy saw me and immediately tried to look innocent, which only made him look guiltier. Boy, I said, crossing my arms. You up to something? He grinned, missing one of his front teeth. No, sir. Uh-huh. I followed his gaze, which was locked onto my house across the street. What are you watching? He shifted, scuffing his shoe against the pavement. Lady's been having company. My skin went cold, but I didn't let it show. That so? Yes, sir. Fancy car. Same one. Black Mercedes. Comes round when you ain't home. He squinted up at me. You know him. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a 5, and handed it over. You see that car again, you let me know. His eyes lit up. Yes, sir. I clapped him on the shoulder and walked back into the station, the slow burn in my gut turning to something harder. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It wasn't just a gut feeling. Margaret was sloppy. And she was going to regret that. By the time Tyler called back, I already knew what he was going to say. A man doesn't spend 30 years piecing together lies for a living without recognizing when someone's feeding him one. But knowing and proving are two different things, and I was a man who believed in proof. Got your answers, Tyler said, voice dry as old leather. They've been meeting for a while. First out of town, then closer to home. Cedar Grove's their spot, but they've been careful, cash payments, fake names. He snorted. Real cute. The guy's a smooth talker, I'll give him that. Keeps things real professional, like he's closing a business deal. Makes her feel important. I sat on my porch, rolling a toothpick between my teeth, watching the sun set over Jasper Creek. You get photos? Enough to ruin a marriage. Or a career. Or both. Send them over. There was a pause, then Tyler sighed. Look, Derek, you sure about this? You want em bad enough to see it in color. I exhaled slow, watching the last of the light dip behind the hills. I ain't the type to look away. The line went dead. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. I opened the folder Tyler sent, flicked through the images. Margaret, sitting too close to Seth in a dimly lit hotel lounge. Her hand on his knee in the parking lot. Him, smirking like he'd won a prize. I set the phone down and stared out at the yard. My dog, an old blue heeler named Bo, stretched out by the steps, watching me like he knew something was off. I reached down, scratched behind his ears. Looks like I've been given my loyalty to the wrong people, boy. Bo thumped his tail once and went back to sleep. Smartest one in the house. By morning I had a plan. I didn't just want to confront them, I wanted control. A man like Seth thrived on power, on playing people like a hand of cards. And Margaret, well, she liked thinking she was the smartest person in the room. That's where they both miscalculated. Because I wasn't a man who played his cards out in the open. I found Red in his usual spot, parked outside the diner, sipping gas station coffee. He rolled down the window when he saw me coming. Morning, Sheriff. What can I do for ya? I leaned on the car door. How much you know about Seth Harrison? Red grinned, slow and wolfish. Enough to know he's a snake. What's your interest? Want to make his life harder. Red chuckled, setting his cup down. Well, hell, Derek. You should have just led with that. By noon, Red had put the word out. Seth's name started circulating through all the right places: dealerships, real estate offices, high-end clubs. Little whispers, small rumors. He's got money trouble. He's not as sharp as he used to be. He's messing with the wrong man's wife. Men like Seth relied on perception. Take that away and they started slipping. Meanwhile, I made sure Margaret noticed the shift. She came home that evening, distracted, tense. I sat at the kitchen table reading the paper while she paced, phone in hand. "You okay?" I asked, keeping my voice easy. She forced a smile. "Yeah. Just work stress." I nodded. Funny thing. Red was telling me about some hotshot consultant in town. Said he was making a lot of enemies real fast. Her fingers tightened around her phone. "Oh. Yeah." I met her eyes, slow and steady. Said some folks are real interested in making sure he don't do business here no more. For the first time in a long time, she looked rattled. I went back to my paper. "Dinner's in the fridge. Heat it up if you want it." I heard her exhale, sharp and uneven, before she walked upstairs. "Good. Let her stew." The cracks started showing fast. Margaret had always been the type to keep things neat, to control every little detail of her life like a well-organized planner. But you put enough pressure on something and even the strongest dam starts to leak. I let her sit with the weight of it for a couple of days. Gave her space to feel the shift, to realize that the world around her wasn't playing along anymore. Seth must have felt it too, because the next time I saw Red, he was grinning like a man who just found $20 in an old jacket. "Your boy's losing his cool," he said, stirring his coffee outside the gas station. "Got a buddy down at the First National Bank," says Seth's been calling in favors left and right, trying to keep things from slipping. "Looks like he's about one bad week from drowning." I nodded slow. "And Margaret?" Red took a sip, smacked his lips. "She's nervous. Real nervous. Heard her talking in the back seat the other day, voice real low, clipped. Told Loverboy to fix it." He grinned. "You fixin' to help him with that?" I didn't answer. Just turned toward my truck, tossing my empty cup in the bin on the way. That evening, I made sure I was home before Margaret. Sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills. Bo lay at my feet, ears twitching at the sound of crickets warming up for the night. When her car pulled in, I stayed where I was. She stepped out, heels clicking against the gravel, purse tucked tight under her arm. There was a stiffness in the way she carried herself, like she'd spent the whole drive thinking about how to act normal. She spotted me and hesitated, just for a second. Then she forced a smile. "Didn't think you'd be home this early?" "Things were quiet," I said, scratching Bo behind the ears. "Figured I'd take it easy." She lingered in the driveway, fingers tapping against her purse. "You eat?" "Not yet." I nodded toward the porch chair next to mine. "Join me." She hesitated again, then made her way up the steps. Sat down slow, back straight like she was waiting for a verdict. For a long time, we just listened to the cicadas. The wind carried the smell of honeysuckle from Mrs. Langley's garden next door. If I closed my eyes, it could have been any other summer night. But it wasn't. "I ran into Red today," I said, finally, keeping my voice even. "Said he's been real busy lately. Lots of folks in town got their hands full with rumors." Margaret kept her gaze fixed on the yard. "That's so?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Seems there's a man in town folks don't take kindly to. One of those slick types. Talks big, but his feet ain't planted." I turned my head, met her eyes. "Sound familiar?" Her jaw tightened. "Derek, if you've got something to say, say it." I studied her a long moment. Took in the way her grip tightened on the chair arm, the way her breathing changed, small things, but they told me everything. So I reached into my shirt pocket, pulled out my phone, and slid it across the table. "Got a call from Tyler the other day. Figured you'd want to see what he found." She stared at the phone like it might explode. Didn't move to pick it up. I leaned back. "You're a smart woman, Maggie. Always have been. So tell me, when exactly did you start thinking I was stupid?" Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. I let the silence stretch, let it settle heavy between us. Then I stood, slow and steady. "I'll be sleeping at the station tonight," I said, stepping off the porch. "Take some time. Figure out how you want to handle this." I didn't wait for an answer. Just climbed into my truck, started the engine, and pulled onto Main Street. In the rearview mirror, I saw her still sitting there, staring at the phone like it held the weight of a noose. Good. Let her sit with it. Let her feel what it's like to have the ground shift under her feet. Because by the time I was done, she'd know exactly how it felt to lose control. I slept like a man who had nothing to lose. The cot in my office wasn't comfortable, but it was familiar. A man can adjust to anything when he has to. The smell of stale coffee and the distant hum of the highway outside reminded me of nights I'd spent here before, waiting on a suspect to break, waiting on a call that never came. Jake showed up early, pushing through the door with a styrofoam cup in each hand. "Figured you'd still be here," he said, setting one down on my desk. "Rough night?" I took a sip, nodded. "Could have been worse." He leaned against the filing cabinet, arms crossed. "I take it things at home are unsettled?" I let out a dry chuckle. "That's one way to put it." Jake didn't push. He knew me well enough to let me talk at my own pace. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. After a long moment, I pulled out my phone, scrolled through the folder Tyler had sent, and turned the screen toward him. His face hardened as he looked at the pictures. "Damn." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I take it she don't know you're packin' this kinda heat?" "She knows now," I said, setting the phone down. "Left her with it last night. Gave her some time to think." Jake whistled low. "That's some cold justice, Sheriff." "Justice ain't cold," I said, stretching my shoulders. "It's just fair." By noon, I got the first message from Margaret. A simple, clipped text, "We need to talk." I let it sit for an hour before I responded. "Come by the station." She showed up just after 2, looking put together but tight around the edges. The polished mask was slipping. She stepped inside, took one glance around like she was hoping for privacy, then crossed her arms. "We shouldn't do this here." I leaned back in my chair. "Seems like the best place to me. Everything about this situation smells like a crime scene." She exhaled sharply. "Derek, don't do this." I didn't move, didn't blink. "Do what, Margaret?" "State the facts?" "Ask how long my wife's been sneaking around with a 2-bit fraud." She flinched but recovered quick. "It wasn't like that." "Then how was it?" I asked, my voice steady even. "Because I got pictures that say otherwise." Her mouth pressed into a tight line. "I didn't plan for this to happen." I let out a short laugh. "Well, that's good to know. Just stumbled into a hotel room by accident, huh?" She sighed, rubbing her temple like she was tired. "I felt invisible, Derek. You were always at the station. Always in town business. Seth made me feel seen." I nodded slowly, taking that in. Then I stood up, placing both palms flat on the desk. "You felt invisible, so you decided to burn the house down? That about sum it up." She didn't answer. "Didn't have to." I straightened, let the silence stretch until she shifted on her feet. Then I walked to the filing cabinet, pulled out a thick manila folder, and dropped it in front of her. "That right there," I said, tapping the cover, "is every financial account we've got, every shared asset, and a notarized divorce petition drafted first thing this morning. I've already frozen the joint accounts. Your lawyer can go through it, but the bottom line is simple: you walk out of here clean, or I make sure this town knows exactly what you've been up to." She swallowed hard. "You wouldn't." I met her eyes, steady as ever. "Try me." Her jaw tightened. She knew I didn't bluff. A long moment passed before she reached for the folder, her fingers trembling just enough to notice. She didn't open it, just held it tight against her chest like it was the only thing keeping her together. Then she lifted her chin. "You think this makes you the good guy?" I smiled, slow and tired. "No, Maggie. Just makes me the guy who ain't getting played anymore." She turned on her heel and walked out. I didn't watch her go. Just sat back down, let out a breath, and stared at the empty doorway. Bo was waiting for me when I got home that night, his tail thumping against the porch. The house was quiet, her perfume still lingered, but she was gone. I sat down on the porch steps, scratched behind Bo's ears, and watched the sun go down over Jasper Creek. The sky was wide, open, steady. The way things ought to be. It didn't take long for the town to catch on. Jasper Creek wasn't a place where things stayed quiet, not for long. Folks noticed when Margaret wasn't at the grocery store, when her car wasn't in the driveway, when I walked into Dottie's diner alone and sat at my usual booth like nothing had changed. Red slid in across from me one morning, tipping his hat back with a smirk. "So, on a scale of 1 to he's about to pack his bags and skip town, how bad's our friend Seth looking?" I stirred my coffee, taking my time before answering. "I'd say about 3 missed phone calls from bankruptcy." Red chuckled, shaking his head. "Hate to see it." I didn't hate to see it. In fact, I'd been making damn sure of it. Margaret had chosen a man who built his world on a house of cards, and I'd made sure the wind blew just right. Word had spread fast, Seth's business deals soured, investors pulled out, and he was left scrambling. A man like him needed confidence to sell what he was peddling, and when that confidence cracked, the whole thing collapsed. Margaret, for all her careful planning, had hitched her wagon to the wrong man. I took a slow sip of coffee. "He's still around?" Red smirked. "Not for long. Got a buddy who drives for Sunline Moving Company, says Seth booked a last-minute haul back to Dallas. Guess his welcome here ran out." I nodded, satisfied. Jasper Creek had a way of weeding out men who didn't belong. Margaret, on the other hand, had stuck around a little longer. For the first week after she left, she'd been staying at a motel on the edge of town. Maybe waiting for me to change my mind. Maybe waiting for Seth to throw her a lifeline. But when that call never came, she packed up and left without so much as a goodbye. One afternoon, Jake knocked on my office door, stepping inside with a hesitant look. "Sheriff, just thought you'd want to know Margaret put the house on the market this morning." I leaned back in my chair, fingers tapping against the desk. "That's so?" He nodded. "Realtor says she's looking for a quick sale." That was fine by me. I'd already signed the papers, made sure my half of the house and land was secured before she could so much as put a price tag on the damn fence. Jake hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "I guess that's it then. Looks like." He nodded again, shifting on his feet. "If you want to grab a drink later, let me know." I looked up at him, saw something there, concerned maybe. I appreciated it, but I didn't need it. "I'm good, Jake." "Really?" He studied me for a second before nodding. "All right. Just figured I'd offer." I spent that evening on the porch, watching Bo chase a rabbit through the yard before giving up and flopping down in the dirt. The town moved the same as it always had, people going about their business, life continuing without hesitation. That was the thing about Jasper Creek. You could go through hell, lose what you thought was solid, and the town would still be standing when you came out the other side. When I walked inside, I found a small package sitting on the kitchen counter. No return address, just my name scrawled in Margaret's handwriting. I opened it, pulling out an old book, Lonesome Dove, the same one I used to read in the evenings when we first got married. Inside the front cover was a folded piece of paper. I was wrong. About a lot of things. That was all she wrote. No apology, no plea, just that one simple sentence. I stood there for a moment, staring at the words, then folded the paper back up and tucked it between the pages. I didn't feel anger. Didn't feel regret. Just a quiet understanding that some things, once broken, didn't need fixing. I set the book on the shelf and turned off the light. Tomorrow was just another day. A year passed. The seasons changed like they always did, slow and steady, not giving a damn about the things people lost along the way. Margaret was gone, sold the house and left town without a word. Seth was probably somewhere licking his wounds, trying to rebuild his image, pretending Jasper Creek had never happened. Didn't matter. They were ghosts now. The town moved on, and so did I. I left the sheriff's office 3 months back. 30 years was enough. Jake took over the badge, just like I always figured he would. He had the right mix of patience and fire, knew how to handle people. I still stopped by sometimes, gave him a hard time about paperwork, but it wasn't my fight anymore. I bought a little bookstore on Main Street, the old one that had been shut for years. Fixed it up slow, one board at a time, got it looking like something worth stepping into. Didn't do it for the money, just needed something to do with my hands. Kept a pot of coffee going in the back, let folks sit and read if they felt like it. Red stopped by most mornings, drinking my coffee like he owned the place. "Can't believe a man like you spends his time alphabetizing books," he muttered one day, flipping through a copy of True Grit. "Better than spending it dragging drunks out of ditches," I said, not looking up from the counter. He grinned. "Fair point. The town still respected me. Folks nodded when they saw me. Still called me sheriff even though I'd hung that title up for good. I liked it better this way. Didn't need to carry a gun to remind people who I was." One afternoon, the bell over the door jingled, and I looked up to see Daphne standing there. My daughter, full-grown, wearing city clothes, looking like she wasn't sure if she belonged. We hadn't talked much over the years. She'd left Jasper Creek young, said small-town life wasn't for her, said I was too rigid, too stubborn. She wasn't wrong. "Hey, Dad," she said, glancing around. "Didn't expect you to own a bookstore." I leaned on the counter, watching her. "Didn't expect you to walk through the door." A small smirk tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Guess we both got surprises." She stepped inside, ran her fingers over the shelves like she was measuring the weight of things left unsaid. I let her take her time. Eventually, she grabbed a book, Lonesome Dove, same one Margaret had sent me. "You used to read this all the time," she said, flipping it open. I nodded. "Still do." She hesitated, then closed it and set it on the counter. "I thought maybe we could grab a coffee or something." I studied her a moment, then picked up my hat. "Sounds like a plan." The bell jingled again as we stepped out into the street. The sun hung low over Jasper Creek, stretching long shadows over the pavement. I tipped my hat back, breathing in the familiar scent of dry earth, and the distant smell of barbecue from Clancy's smokehouse down the block. The past was dead weight. The people who left weren't worth carrying. I had a future, a name that still meant something, and a town that still stood behind me. A man could lose a lot in this world, but dignity, that you held on to,